Hey guys! Welcome to Couple. Please like and subscribe if you like this video. Incarcerated Americans are often forced to work for cents an hour. So they're launching what could be their biggest protest ever. America's prisoners are going on strike. The demonstrations are planned to take place from August 21st to September 9th, which marks the anniversary of the bloody uprising at the Attica Correctional Facility in New York. During this time, inmates across the U.S. plan to refuse to work and, in some cases, refuse to eat to draw attention to poor prison conditions and what many view as exploitative labor practices in American correctional facilities. Prisoners want to be valued as contributors to our society, Amani Savari, a spokesperson for the protests, told me. Every single field and industry is affected on some level by prisons, from our license plates to the fast food that we eat to the stores that we shop at. So we really need to recognize how we are supporting the prison industrial complex through the dollars that we spend. Prison labor issues recently received attention in California, where inmates have been voluntarily recruited to fight the state's record wildfires for the paltry pay of just $1 an hour plus $2 per day. But the practice of using prison inmates for cheap or free labor is fairly widespread in the U.S., due to an exemption in the 13th Amendment, which abolished chattel slavery but allows involuntary servitude as part of a punishment for a crime. For Savari and the inmates participating in the protests, the sometimes forced labor and poor pay is effectively modern slavery. That, along with poor prison conditions that inmates blame for a deadly South Carolina prison riot earlier this year, have led to protests. For prisons, though, fixing the problems raised by the demonstrations will require money, something that cash-strapped state governments may not be willing to put up. That raises real questions about whether the inmates' demands can or will be heard. The demonstrations come 2 years after what was then the largest prison strike in U.S. history, with protests breaking out in at least 12 states in 2016. The new demonstrations could end up even larger than those previous protests. Protests are planned in at least 17 states. There's no hard estimate for how many inmates and prisons are taking part in the protests, as organizers continue to recruit more and more inmates and word of mouth spreads. But demonstrations are expected across at least 17 states. The inmates will take part in work strikes, hunger strikes, and sit-ins. They are also calling for boycotts against agencies and companies that benefit from prisons and prison labor. The main leverage that an inmate has is their own body, Savari said. If they choose not to go to work and just sit in the main area or the eating area, and all the prisoners choose to sit there and not go to the kitchen for lunchtime or dinner time, if they choose not to clean or do the yard work, this is the leverage that they have. Prisons cannot run without prisoners' work. While 2016's protests were largely planned for just September 9th, then the 45th anniversary of the Attica uprising, they ended up taking part over weeks or months as prison officials tried to tamp down the demonstrations and mitigate the effects of the protests. This year, the protests are spread out over 3 weeks to make it more difficult for prison officials to crack down.